has been showing strong here in Northshire. And I wanted to highlight one of my favorite classics of American literature, Invisible Man by Ralph Ellison, to sort of kick off this whole event. And sorry, there's the phone. It's not just an important work in relation to what's going on nowadays, but it's just one of the best classics of American literature, period. It's part coming of age story, it's part political awakening for the main character, and it actually culminates with a fictionalized version of one of the Harlem riots, the one that happened in 1943, after a white police officer shot an African-American soldier. So you can see that the themes that have been happening then are still happening now. There are some very uncomfortable and strongly written scenes in this, but it is so wonderfully done, and I am a better person for having read it. So I definitely encourage you to pick this one up first. Just to go along with this color pattern that I've got going on here is Little Eyes by Samantha Schweblin, which is the next book I'm going to talk about. And this one actually ties a bit more into a lot of our modern age right now, especially the fact that we're talking about this book over a Zoom meeting is extremely apropos. It's about communication, digitally speaking, but in the weirdest, most almost disturbing way that I can think of. There are, I don't want to give too much of it out, but there are concurrent stories that deal with a new technology that allow some people to view other people's homes embodied in these little devices that they control. So somebody buys a device and they have a little watcher that sort of lives with them. And then somebody else, maybe on the other side of the world, can buy control of that device. So there's some really strange relationships that happen because of which, and it's so weird and good. And if you've read any of her stuff, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. That's all I want to say about it. This is one of those books that it's actually almost better to go in blind. It's so much fun. It has a sort of like a Dan Shawn-esque ending where everything sort of just crunches down to a halt, and it's just amazing. On a much lighter and funner note, although it's also deals with some heavier stuff too, is Pizza Girl by Fraser, and it's just such a fun book. I saw the cover and I immediately wanted to read it. Let me get my notes here. So the main character is actually a pizza delivery girl, and she gets a call from a struggling mother whose kid will only eat pizza if it has pickles on it. And they don't actually sell pickled pizza at their shop. So she goes out and gets pickles for this pizza. And that is the beginning of this very strange, wonderful relationship and adventure that these two characters go on with one another. It's a tale of obsession. It's strange. It's the main character is a mess. She's, your typical 20-something year old. We're all messes at that point in our lives. A lot of fun, great ending, and I can't say that about a lot of books that I pick up. So look forward to that one. Those are the books that I've actually read in full. I wanted to talk about a couple of books that I just started, but I'm so excited about it because they're just wonderfully written so far. The first one is that mine or is that your connection? Can you guys hear that weird statickiness? Yeah. Okay. We are just going, yeah, it's that. We're gonna adjust here. My apologies about that. Okay. Yep, it's the computer itself that's making that noise. All right. This is the fun part of technology, is figuring it out as we go. All right. Next is Lot by Brian Washington. And it's a series of short stories that are all interconnected. They are based around this one family that lives in Houston, Texas. The main character is biracial. Mother is a Black woman and father is a Latino man, and has two siblings as well. He's also discovering his sexuality. He's realizing that he likes boys, and it's stories of him growing up in this environment, in a struggling situation. And the main story, the title story, is worth reading it alone. So definitely check this one out. The next one on my pile is one of my favorite covers that I've seen recently. It is Sharks in the Time of Saviors by Kawhi Strong Washburn. And I really just started it. It's just so beautifully written. It's got these sentences that really just sort of pull you along, and it's descriptive, it's atmospheric. It's narrated by a mother speaking to her son, and she's drawing details of something strange that happened to and because of the son. And it's very mythical and sort of myth-inducing. And that's all I want to say about it right now. It's just beautifully written. If you like a strong voice, boom, that's the one for you. And speaking of strong voices, another one that I started and I'm super invested in already is The Last Taxi Driver. It's a day in the life of a taxi driver who lives in Mississippi. He's got strange fares, there are strange smells. He's philosophizing from anything from the meaning of life to whether Uber will steal his existence. And it opens on a scene of him driving a recently released prisoner who asks the driver to bring him around to all of his ex-girlfriend's apartments and then breaks in and steals their alcohol. So it starts on a very strange, funny note, and the voice is also extremely strong. I'm gonna be real quick about these next two because these are actually not out yet. This one is called Action Park. If you're not from New Jersey, which I'm not either, you probably don't know about Action Park, but if you've been through or if you went through in the 80s especially, Action Park was an actual theme park that was open from 1978 till 1996 when it was closed because of a number of personal injury lawsuits. It was one of those sort of, find your own adventure kind of parks. There was a lot of lack of safety regulations. Many of the staff were either undertrained or frequently almost as intoxicated as some of their guests. It developed nicknames anywhere from Traction Park to Accident Park to Class Action Park. It's the most 80s book that I've ever read. It's so much fun. And it's actually written by the son of the person who created Action Park on the side of a ski slope during the summertime when he was at a loss for what else to do with his business. So really strange and weird and fun. Great summer read. And then this one, we've been fighting over this book in the store. It's called Crossings by Alex Landdragon. And it's got easily the most exciting premise that I've heard of in years. In the preface, Landdragon explains that he didn't actually write this book. The pretense is that he is merely a bookbinder who was given this manuscript to bind for a private collector. And then that collector mysteriously dies. But the book itself, the main body of the manuscript, they find out that it can be read in two different ways. So right through, or it gives you a key in the beginning, right there, for the pages that you would skip to as you're reading along in the book. So you could either read it straight through, or you could jump from page 251 to page 49 and read it that way. And it's supposed to come out to be almost two different novels, all with the same body of text. So, if you're a fan of Hopscotch by Julio Cortázar or House of Leaves by Mark Z. Danielewski, that's the one for you. It's very metafiction, and it's just going to be so much fun. So I have a prediction that one's going to be the literary hit of the summer. We'll see if I'm right. Thank you guys so much for listening, and I hope you enjoy.
Thank you so much, Joe. Just to chime in, I wholeheartedly second the recommendation for Lot. That book is incredible, and also Brian Washington has been writing some amazing articles, I think in the New Yorker or possibly the New York Times, about his experiences of the Black Lives Matter protests in Houston. And it's well worth checking those out. His writing is just sensational. So thank you, Joe. Also a note to everybody, if Joe disappears suddenly, it's not because he doesn't like us. He does have to get back out to the sales floor in the Vermont store and sell books there. So when he disappears, don't take it personally. There's a reason for it. So next up to present his list of books is the wonderful Mike Hare, bookseller extraordinaire from our Saratoga store, who it is lovely to see. I've seen him a couple of times from afar with a mask, but it's nice to see your whole face, Mike. Thanks for being here, and you can go ahead and unmute yourself.
Likewise, Rachel, and I would second the recommendation for Lot. They're amazing stories. and you get a good sense of a person who is part of the community, but not because of the sexual orientations and because of the race. And it's done very, very well. And the last taxi driver is right from the beginning to the end, Joe. You'll like that all the way through. He's a character, and his fares are characters, and the car that he drives is sort of a character. The whole thing is great. It's just a lot of fun to read. But the first book that I have deals with our current situation today, and it is The Warmth of Other Suns. And with what's been happening in the country in the last few weeks, it doesn't need to be spoken of directly here. We all know what's happening, but there are many, many fine books about racial relations in the U.S. that have been written and are being written now and will be written with what's happening. And this is, to me, one of the best, at least that I've encountered in the last 10 years, or certainly in the 21st century. It's written by Isabel Wilkerson, and it came out around 2010. And The Warmth of Other Suns, the title is derived from a poem by Richard Wright, a well-known mid-20th century African-American poet who from the South was looking to escape the South and try to find the warmth of other suns in a different place. So it actually ties in very well with the overall overarching theme of this book, which is the epic story of America's Great Migration. But that really shouldn't fool you to think that this is some statistical book about all these people coming from the South to the North. It's there. The statistics are not even a part of the story, because the story is three specific individuals who Isabel Wilkerson interviewed toward the end of their lives. She took, I think, about 10 years to write this book or close to it. And these three individuals came from the South to the North as part of the Great Migration, sometime in the 30s and 40s. The Great Migration happened for African Americans from the South to the North, basically from about the time of World War I, 1915, 1916, till through the 60s or around 1970. It wasn't a steady stream, it kind of ebbed and flowed, but that was for the African American population to escape Jim Crow, to escape the plantations, to escape indentured servitude, and to come north. And what Isabel Wilkerson did was interview three individuals who made this journey, and they were able to discuss their journey from the perspective of living most of their lives in the North. One was a man from the East Coast of Florida who went up to the New York City area and worked on the train. So he was driving back and forth on the trains to take people to and from the South, crossing the Mason-Dixon line thousands of times in his life where there was segregation and there wasn't segregation. He's one of the characters. The second character is a woman who was a cotton picker in Alabama, picking cotton. I've never done it. I hope no one here has. It doesn't sound like a pleasing job. It's a very difficult, draining, meticulous job, and clearly during the antebellum and beyond that, picking cotton was a huge industry even before the cotton gin in the South. Anyway, the woman was able to escape Alabama and relocate into Chicago, and she lived there for the rest of her life. The third character was a doctor. He was from New Orleans. He became a medical doctor, and he went out to Los Angeles. One of his patients was Ray Charles, so he made a very successful life for himself. But these three characters are portrayed in a very lyrical, literary, moving way. It's a very big book. It's about, just checking, it's 570 pages or so in a very small font, but it reads very quickly because she is a exquisite storyteller, and her writing is, as I said, lyrical and moving, and you get a feel for what's happening in the Great Migration just by tracing these three lives. And something that's important to note, and it's sort of self-evident, but you don't think that it is at times, is that when these folks fled the South, they were hoping for better lives in the North, but then of course they ran into all kinds of obstacles in the North, from some whites, from some African Americans who had been there previously, from systematic racism that happened in the North at a different degree and a different level than in the South. But this is a wonderful, wonderful book. I couldn't really say much more about it, and I'm so happy that people are buying it now. In fact, I think it's close to being a bestseller if it's not. And it's paperback, and it's definitely worth the read for anybody that wants to investigate a little bit of the history of what's happening today, because what's happening today certainly isn't happening in a vacuum by any means. And this is a wonderful 20th century look at racism in the United States. The second book is called Kim Jae-young, born 1982, and is a South Korean novel, and the author is Cho Nam-jo. I probably mispronounced her name, but this is a new book. It just came out. It was just translated and released in the U.S. During the pandemic, just a few weeks ago, I believe. And if you notice the cover of the book, you see that she doesn't have a face. Where is she? And that's basically what the book is about. The book is about, I would probably to classify it quickly, gender discrimination in South Korea. This woman was born in 1982, so she would be 38 years old today. Actually, it traces her from her childhood until 2017. It's about her childhood, her schooling, her education, her marriage, her jobs, and every step of the way, she runs into gender problems. It's the sort of society described in this book where the mother gives birth to the child, the doctor says, the mother says, how's my baby? And the doctor says, I'm sorry, but it's a girl. So that is sort of the backdrop of this novel. And I've never been to South Korea. Maybe some of you out there have. I have not been. And you think of South Korea, maybe it certainly is more liberated than its neighbor to the north, but it's a very harsh description of what's going on in South Korea. And unlike The Warmth of Other Suns, this is quite an interesting thing. The Warmth of Other Suns is a work of nonfiction written very, very lyrically. This is a work of fiction written in a very, very matter-of-fact style. So the style is completely different. That's very long. This is very short. It's about 150 pages. But actually, the style itself lends itself very well to the story, and the ending is masterful. It's a great ending once you get to the end of this book. I would definitely recommend this book very highly as a new release. Kim Jae-young, born 1982. The third book is Hidden Valley Road, and this is Oprah's pick of the month and pick of the year, whatever it is. Oprah's 2020 book club book, so it's her yearly pick. And I didn't look at this just because of that, but I thought I'd give it a try, and it's definitely worth reading. And you see the cover there. I don't know if you can tell, but there's a man and a woman up here, then there's down a spiral staircase, and there are 10 kids kind of standing there. And it's about the Galvin family of Colorado, and they actually had 12 kids. They had 10 boys and 2 girls. And 6 of the children developed schizophrenia in their life. And this book is about the devastating impact that disease had on their family. 10 boys and then 2 girls, and it was very random in terms of what children developed the disease. Some of the children developed it very quickly. Some, it was sort of a slow process. The oldest child in particular, there was kind of acting odd, something strange, what's going on here? Then he'd be fine, and then he'd be acting odd again. Hearing voices is one of the best known symptoms, or one of the best known tells of schizophrenia. Others are as well. But the problem with this disease, and I hope nobody here as anyone knows anyone that has this horrible malady, because it's a very difficult disease to treat. And one of the reasons is the cause of the disease is still a matter of conjecture. It certainly was with this family. These children were born between 1945 and 1965. So the woman was pregnant over half of those 20 years, and it actually it encompasses the baby boom. If the baby boom started in 1946 and ended in 1964, these children were all part of the baby boom when there were big families all over the country. Obviously, the baby boom started at the conclusion of World War II. So this particular family had more than the normal number of children, but maybe not that far out of the realm of what was normal at the time. And they were basically confuse the parents in terms of what do we do to fix this. And then there's the cause and effect aspect of it as well. Is this a hereditary disease? If so, why did some people have it in the family, some people didn't, some of the kids didn't? Is it caused by your environment, but they all grew up in the same environment? Of course, if you're the firstborn, it's much different than if you're the 7th or 8th the child in the family in terms of parenting and interaction and so forth. So the book is about this particular family and the efforts to try to deal with this terrible disease, schizophrenia. And there is a lot of medical information here too in terms of advances in trying to come up with ways to remedy and at least help people that are suffering from the disease, if not necessarily cure them. So it says Inside the Mind of an American Family, and it's definitely worth reading. The author is Robert Kolker. He also wrote a book called Lost Girls. Maybe some of you have read that. That came out here 10 years ago. I have not. I would like to, though, because this book is very well written, very well researched, and it will be, I'm sure, a popular book through the year, if not for any other reason, because Oprah gives her stamp of approval. But it's definitely worth reading. Hidden Valley Road by Robert Kolker. 2 more books I have, and this came out as a paperback just very recently, and it's Upheaval by Jared Diamond. Maybe some of you have read Guns, Germs, and Steel, which is probably his best known book. He's in his 70s, if not close to 80 now, but he writes like someone half his age. He's got a very engaging, wonderful writing style and an outlook, and a very diverse individual. He's traveled the world, and Upheaval is a very pertinent book to be reading these days, because what Diamond does is he looks very carefully at countries in the last 200 years who have been in a state of upheaval. And you could argue now that the United States may or may not be in a state of upheaval, so there might be a way, there might be a reason to look at the book because of what's happening here. And his studies in the countries that he looks at are both positive and negative in terms of what has happened, how in terms of how they dealt with difficult situations that they faced. He deals with Japan not once but twice. He deals with Japan after Commodore Perry's visit in 1853, which basically opened up Japan to the West. Before that, Japan had been somewhat of an isolated, very much an isolated society. So how did Japan deal with that? Then how did Japan deal with the aftermath of World War II and Hiroshima and losing the war and the horrible catastrophic events, and of course Pearl Harbor involved in that as well? How did Japan deal with that? Did they do the right things? Did they do the wrong things? Another country that he looks at is Chile. And Chile in the 1970s, I believe in 1970, Salvador Allende was the socialist prime minister of Chile. He was a very progressive individual, and he was basically deposed in a military coup led by General Pinochet in September of 1973. And Pinochet ruled the country for about 20 years. His military organization did, and it was a very, very harsh environment. What did Chile do wrong to have that kind of thing happen? And another country I'll mention is Finland in World War II, and I've never really thought about Finland in World War II. Maybe there's some Finnish individuals watching now that know much more about this than me, but Finland managed to stay neutral in World War II. And you think, well, what's the big deal? Well, the big deal was that Russia was to one side of them, the Soviet Union and Stalin, and Germany was on the other side. And Finland is not a populous country, but there's a large landmass there. But Finland was able somehow to not be taken over by the Soviet Union or by Nazi Germany during World War II. And how did they manage to do that? Well, Diamond goes into reasons why these things happen, for good or for bad. He talks about negotiation, he talks about compromise, he talks about a realistic attitude, he talks about being able to try to see the other person's point of view, in this case, the other country's points of view, what's best in the long run, not a short-term game, but a long-term situation or a long-term perspective. So it has all of these wonderful aspects that we can appreciate, I think, today in this country. And it also shows that what we're going through now is certainly not, it's not unique. It's happened before in other countries. It happened here with the Civil War, certainly. And the subtitle here, Turning Points for Nations in Crisis. And it reads very, very quickly. It's a little bit long, about over 400 pages, but highly recommended. It flows very, very nicely for good and bad reasons. And it can be not necessarily a learning tool specifically, but you can basically learn from your mistakes, and countries have made mistakes just the way people have in the past. And my last book is one of my favorites since I started working at the bookstore a few years ago. And this is a Japanese book, and it's called The Traveling Cat Chronicles. And I think Rachel's heard me talk about this at the store and with customers, and it's just wonderful. Hiro Arakawa is the author. The translator is Philip Gabriel, who has translated Murakami, I believe, from what I understand. It's a wonderful translation. And the book is about it's basically a travelogue involving a cat in Japan. And the cat narrates more than half the book. And people who have cats know that cats have attitudes, and they can be difficult, and they have attitudes, and this cat has an attitude too. However, the book itself it's more than the cat's attitude. It's about what happens to the cat and why does he travel the country. Well, the cat is a stray, and he introduces himself as a stray at the beginning of the book. And some guy was feeding him little scraps, little snacks underneath his van. So the cat would go to this van and take his free meal. Why not? Then one day the cat gets hit by a car, and he basically what happened was he broke his leg. It wasn't debilitating, but it didn't kill him, but he was in very bad shape. So he limps back to this guy's van. The guy takes him into his house, and then they bond and form a relationship. And the cat and his owner, or maybe the owner is maybe the cat is the owner and the man isn't, but anyway, they travel in this white van through Japan. And as the book goes on, the reasons for their journey become clear. The relationship between the cat and the gentleman who takes the cat in becomes clear. And it's a very moving book, and it's actually a very sweet book, and it's a very moving in the terms of moving across the country, but also emotionally moving. But it's not cloying and it's not saccharine because of the cat's attitude. So there's a wonderful balance there. And it's very short too. It's maybe a little over 200 pages, but highly, highly worth reading. It's a very popular international book. It's been out for a little bit over a year in the US, and it's very, very, very wonderful story, not just about two people, but also about Japanese society, because he's visiting his friends, he's seeing people that he knows. So you get a good flavor of what life is like, not necessarily in Tokyo so much, but throughout the Japanese countryside, because that's where the traveling cat travels in the Traveling Cat Chronicles. So thanks, Rachel and David, for having me again on your program, and let's move right along.
Okay, so I am our last presenter of the evening. For those of you who don't know me, I'm the event manager for Northshire's Saratoga store. There are lots of people on here who I definitely do know, so it's nice to see you and nice to see folks who I haven't met before. Because we have some high school students on the call, I went for a mix today of young adult books and books written for adults. And for those adults on the call who have not heard the gospel of young adult literature, I just want to give a very quick plug. I read a lot. I think, you know, most of you know that. Some of the best books that I read are written for children, both young adult books and middle grade books. There is just some truly sensational writing going on there. So for adults on this Zoom who have not given a try to a young adult novel or a middle grade novel, I strongly recommend that you do, because there is some truly sensational writing happening for children and teens in this country today. But that's the soapbox. I'll step off of the soapbox and start talking actual books. The first one on my list is a graphic novel written for young adults, actually a graphic memoir. It's called Almost American Girl by Robin Ha. She also has written actually a sensational cookbook / comic book called Cook Korean, which is incredible and delicious, so worth checking out. But Almost American Girl is a coming of age memoir and an immigration story. So it's her story of moving to this country from South Korea to, I think, Alabama as a teenager. And it is beautifully written, beautifully drawn. The art, you can't really do justice to it through a Zoom screen, but trust me, the art in this is incredible. The writing is incredible. And it's a really great immigration memoir that I think is a wonderful view into what it was like for a teenager in the 90s moving to this country for the first time. I highly, highly recommend this book. It is one that actually every person in my house has read, my husband and both of my kids, and we all really loved it. So I strongly recommend this one. While we're on graphic novels, I'll actually skip further ahead in my list and do one other young adult graphic novel, actually also graphic nonfiction. This is Dragon Hoops by Jean Luen Yang. Jean Luen Yang was the National Ambassador for Children's Literature for the last few years. He just finished his stint. Everything this man writes and draws is worth looking at. He, some years back, won a National Book Award for the duology Boxers and Saints, which was a graphic novel of the Boxer Rebellion, which is incredible. He also, for many years, was a high school computer science teacher at a private high school in the Bay Area. And this is a nonfiction account of the year that his high school's basketball team went to the California State Championship. He is not a basketball guy. He had very little to do with the basketball players. So it's really also a fish out of water story. It's a computer science graphic novelist suddenly hanging out with the basketball team. It is also beautifully written. It is also beautifully drawn. It is actually another book that all 4 people who live in my house have read and loved. I cannot say enough good things about this book. So Dragon Hoops, which was positioned to be a really big book and then came out right at the start of the quarantine. So I don't know how it's been doing, but I strongly recommend that everyone read this book. Also in the young adult space, is an anthology called It's a Whole Spiel, Love, Latkes, and Other Jewish Stories, which I absolutely adored. I had so much fun with this book. It's a collection of both short stories and short nonfiction pieces by Jewish authors from all different circumstances. Some are Orthodox, some are Reform and atheist, some are Jews of color of different races. it deals with all sorts of different aspects of contemporary Jewish teen life in very sensitive and interesting ways. And I loved, you know, I used to actually work with short stories extensively, and I have gotten away from reading a ton of short stories, and I really loved being able to sort of dip into this in pieces, and I enjoyed everything about reading it. So strongly recommend. It's a whole spiel, which is edited by the wonderful young adult author Catherine Locke. So this is a great one. Moving into some books that were written intended for adults, but are great for anybody. I mentioned at the very start of this that I would be talking about the book that I'm reading right now. This is Troop 6000 by Nikita Stewart. And this, you might have caught, there was a, I think, New York Times article that Nikita Stewart wrote a couple of years ago that sort of wound up turning into this book. This is nonfiction. It is about a Girl Scout troop that was founded out of a homeless shelter in Queens, and the families that decided to start it and what their experiences were. This just came out in May. It's brand new. I am blown away by it. I mean, it is really just an incredible story. One of the founders of the troop was herself homeless. And it really looks at generational poverty in a way that I think is really sensitive and beautifully done. And I just, I'm so impressed by this book, and I'm really loving it. Though it is a little bit of a cheater's recommendation because I'm about halfway into it. So maybe it all falls apart at the end, but so far it's amazing. And then I threw in a mystery, which I thought would be really interesting for the students in the group who are looking for a different perspective, because this is a mystery where the detective is really not neurotypical. It's never specifically said what she's experiencing. The book is called A Study in Scarlet Women. It's by Sherry Thomas, and it is a take on Sherlock Holmes. It's set in Victorian London, but Sherlock Holmes is a woman. And all of the things that a woman in Victorian London who is trying to make a go of it as a detective experiences are part of the story, but then also the sort of classic Sherlock Holmes that we've come to know and love in popular culture, who, you know, notices and understands things in this way that is not how neurotypical people's brains quite work. And it's really, really well narrated to give a good experience of what that is like for our Charlotte, also known as Sherlock Holmes. So I had a great time reading this. My book group read it a few months ago, and we all really, really enjoyed it. It is the start of a 5-book series. I have not read the rest of the 5 books. I think there are more coming out in the future. I keep meaning to, but my stacks, as you can imagine, are terrifying. But this is a great mystery if you're looking for good summer reading fun. And then an additional book that is good, fluffy, happy summer reading, if you're looking for that, Real Men Knit by Kwana Jackson. This is a romance/romantic comedy set in Harlem, where a young man inherits his foster mother's knitting store. And there's a young woman who has worked at the knitting store for years who has to sort of help him figure out how to keep it running. It is sweet, fluffy, happy romance. And I loved that it really highlighted the way in which the best city neighborhoods function very much like small towns. I lived in New York City for many years, and the neighborhood where I lived was a small town, much like Saratoga is a small town, where, you know, you can't go to the grocery store without bumping into 7 people you know, and there's gossip and there's all of that. And I think it's really valuable to see that city neighborhoods function that way, and the Harlem in this book very much functions like a small town in the way that, in my experience, city neighborhoods can at their best. So I would recommend this. I thought it was delightful. I sort of tore through it as a happy, distracting read at the very start of quarantine. So if you're looking for happy distraction, this is great. And then if we have time, just a couple more young adult books that I don't have physically with me. I Wish You All the Best by Mason Deaver. Mason Deaver is a non-binary author, and I Wish You All the Best is a young adult coming of age story for a non-binary teen. Ben is kicked out of their house when they come out and wind up living with their sister and going to a new high school. And it is a very sweet, gentle, loving book of what that experience is like. So highly recommend that. It is absolutely lovely. And for me, very eye-opening. I learned a lot of things about gender that I had not known from reading that book. And so I highly, highly recommend it. And then the last one is With the Fire on High by Elizabeth Acevedo, who is a truly wonderful writer. It is another young adult novel with the protagonist, a teen mother who is interested in professional cooking and a truly remarkable cook. I actually listened to that one on audiobook. The author reads the audio of it and does a beautiful, beautiful job. I had first encountered Elizabeth Acevedo's work in her beautiful novel in verse, The Poet X, and she just writes so, so, so beautifully. Her command of language is sensational. So another great one is With the Fire on High. And that is my list for the evening. So I think we have, oh, David, you go ahead, sorry.
Oh, I was just gonna say, yeah, I've put in the chat everybody's all the links to all the books, and we'll have them. They're up on the website as well in the event pages. Though there's a few little errors there. Hidden Valley Road will be there soon on the blog tomorrow morning. I missed that one, and then I put an audiobook up of the wrong one. But all of the links in the chat are correct, and they will be tomorrow on the blog.
So we have, officially we've been wrapping all of these Northshire Live events up at 6. It is 5:45. If people have other books that they'd like to chime in and recommend, either in the chat or themselves, you can go ahead. We can talk about any of the books that we recommended further if people have questions. Whatever people want to use the remaining 15 minutes for is fine by us. But I love the community of readers here, and certainly would be delighted to hear other suggestions. And also if people have very specific, I'm looking for a book about this, you can play Stump the Bookseller, and Mike and David and I can try to see if we can come up with a book that's the thing you're looking for. There's a question in the chat of whether we have the new YA version of Stamped. That is actually the other book that I'm in the middle of right now. We are currently sold out of it. We had a lot of copies of it in, but amazingly, they have all sold. So we have a lot on order. We're hoping to get it in soon, so you could certainly place an order for it, and then when it comes in, it will go to you. It's quite amazing. We were talking about this before the event started, when it was just us getting our tech set up. Books that we've been really, encouraging people to read for years, or in that case, one that's new, but that we were excited about, have been selling in huge numbers lately, to the point that we can't keep them on our shelves, which is really encouraging. It's really great that those books are going out the door. But we are sadly sold out of Stamped right now.
I could chime in for
I was listening to the Manchester store before this pandemic, the not the YA version, the original Stamped by Ibram X. Kendi, and I haven't been having an opportunity to listen to continue it since this pandemic has started, but I can say it's very excellent. I'm up to the Cotton Mather section, or past Cotton Mather. And the part about Jefferson is it's amazing, and I've been trying to figure out when I can get back to it. I have to get used to listening to audiobooks at times when I'm not driving.
Yeah,
Kathy here has a. Go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say that the Young Readers adaptation does a really great job of a very conversational voice. It's such a feat of writing to have sort of pulled all of this information together. We're doing it as a family read aloud with my kids. My husband had already read it, and my kids and I hadn't. And it's really cool how the writing is done to sort of take this very big, very serious adult nonfiction and make it flow as a really sort of engaging book that works for families is really cool. But Mike, I think you had something to say.
Yeah,
Also.
I was just going to echo what you said, Rachel, a moment ago, just about the quality of YA writing. Before I worked at the bookstore, I think I may have read YA books when I was in that category, which was long, long ago. And the quality of the books and the subject matter is very, very profound and very good. One of the books that in fact, I thought about recommending the last time and this time, which I don't believe I did, was The Rise and Fall of Charles Lindbergh, and the author is named Fleming. And it is a very, very adult take on Lindbergh, and Lindbergh was a very controversial individual in many ways, like three different aspects of Lindbergh: the hero of the Spirit of St. Louis, and the huge amount of fame that he never really lost after he made that flight in 1927. And then it was the kidnapping of his baby a few years later, and the arrest of Bruno Hauptmann, and the fact the baby was killed. The ransom didn't apply. And then during World War II, Lindbergh was essentially a German sympathizer, and then the public turned against him. So that's three huge shifts in terms of public appreciation or lack of appreciation for this heroic man, Charles Lindbergh. And Fleming, in her book, deals with all of these things head on. She's not sugarcoating anything. She's not sugarcoating the relationship that he had during World War II with his infatuation with sort of a non-American way of dealing with things. She gets into his own personal character and his difficulties. So it's, I think one of the points I think you may be just kind of making, not me to belabor it, but even though the books may say YA young adult, the books themselves are not just for little kids, and they're not whitewashed in any ways. And there have been many others that I've read in the same vein, and the fiction is good too. I mean, last time I was here, I talked about a YA fiction book. So the YA literature that we have in the store and that's being published and being written and being read, because we see every day these books are very, very popular, and deservedly so, because they are high quality books that adults can appreciate just as much as children. So I was just wanted to back up what you're saying about the fact that the YA books are relevant and important to read no matter your age.
I got a question. A comment here in the chat, a recommendation from one of our usual Booktopia attendees, Victoria Carlin, recommending one of the best books she's read in the last year, saying that she owns it as an audiobook, a hardback, and an ebook, and that is Garrett Graff's The Only Plane in the Sky, which is subtitled An Oral History of 9/11. We hosted him as a conversationalist, as an interviewer for an author we had at the bookstore, for Meg Little Riley, for a novel of hers called The Misfortunes of Family. And he got to talk about it a little bit, and a number of other people have read it and said it was really good. And Victoria loves it. I also put the link for the Charles Lindbergh book in the chat.
And I'm adding to the link, to the chat, the link for the book New Kid. Sarah had asked about possible books for explaining racism and the current situation in the world to students with intellectual disabilities. And New Kid is a really great middle grade graphic novel that I absolutely adored. We actually were lucky enough to host Jerry Craft in the store right after this book came out. I loved it then. I was super excited when it won the Newbery Medal. It was the book that I had been rooting for the Newbery Medal that year. It's a graphic novel that really deals in a very young kid appropriate way with, it's very funny, it's a lot of fun. It's a kid starting a new school. He lives in Washington Heights, and he suddenly finds himself at a very ritzy prep school where he's one of the few Black kids in attendance. And it deals with microaggressions, but also just that, fish out of water kid going to a new school, what all of that is like. So highly recommend that for younger kids. And again, like Mike and I have been saying, really anybody, it's a great book. So I'm adding a link to that in the chat. Also, there was a mention in the chat way back there of Inheritance by Dani Shapiro, which is a really great memoir. I actually have not read that one, though I know a lot of my coworkers have. And I know that Maeve in the Saratoga store, for those of you who know her, absolutely adored that book. And I foolishly ignored Maeve and have not read it yet, but I hear it's quite amazing. So that was in the chat as another recommendation.
I did read a book recently. I'll take a minute to mention it. I didn't mention it the last time during my official bookseller chat last month, just because I think it's a limited interest and the book's not out for a while. It's the New Yorker's music critic, Alex Ross, who wrote a couple wonderful books over the years, The Rest Is Noise, History of 20th Century Music, and a collection of essays called Listen to This, I think, as I recall. His new book, it's coming out, I believe, in September. It's called Wagnerism, Art and Politics. I can't remember the subtitle, but it's sort of a history of the influence of Richard Wagner in everything besides music. And I've been thinking about it a lot lately because it really deals pretty head-on and pretty viscerally with the plays of culture and power and racism, and it's a really compelling book. And but it's a big 800-page beast. So if you know, for some people, I'll put a link to it.
And there's a recommendation for Kylie Reid's "Such a Fun Age" from Carol, which she says deals seriously with matters of race, but is also hilarious. And there's an occasional online book club that I don't make as many meetings as I should that I'm part of, and that group actually just read Such a Fun Age last month and really loved it.
I'll put the link to Such a Fun Age up in just a second.
While we're here, I can mention a couple of galleys, if you wish, that I've read that will be out later in the summer or toward the fall. I'm not certain of the dates, and I don't have the copies of the books with me, but they're both, I would recommend highly. One is written by Natasha Trethewey, and she was the poet laureate of the U.S. a few years ago. She is an African-American woman from Mississippi, and the latest book of poetry that she had came out, I believe, in 2017 or 18. It's called Monument, and the poetry is very, very good, I think. I enjoyed it very much. It's very descriptive, and she was the poet laureate of the U.S., so she's acclaimed, certainly. But the book that she has coming out is called Memorial Drive, and it's a memoir, and it deals with a death in her family, and a brutal death, actually, and it deals with harassment, and it deals with all these grim subjects. And the book is written, you can tell when you're reading it that it's written by a poet, like Isabel Wilkerson, really, in terms of the lyrical style, the moving style of the book. She gets very, very genuinely into the heart of her family and what was going on with this relationship that was bad and the person who got worse as time went on, and the difficulties they had and the tragic circumstance that occurred. But what makes the book, to me, worth reading, not only because she's a wonderful storyteller, is that she's able to relate these situations, very hurtful situations and very painful situations, in a very realistic way, without bitterness, without anger, without, not that she's not bitter or angry, she certainly is, but she's able to express herself in a way where those emotions are muted. They're still there, but she is able to transcend those emotions, I think, and express them in a very heartfelt way. And to me, it's one of the principal reasons why we read poetry or books, or we want to expose ourselves to this type of a thing, because you want to be able to transcend the problems that we may have and difficulties we all have. And how do you do that? How do you get around that kind of thing? And she does that extremely well in the book Memorial Drive. I wish I had the galley here. I could show it, but I think in July it comes out. We can find that out, or we could put that on the website tomorrow, I'm sure. But Memorial Drive by Trethewey is very, very good book, which I, again, would suggest anyone to read. And the other one is called, I just read this last week, called The All-Night Sun by Diane Zimma, who is a first-time author. And this deals with Sweden, another country where I've never been. It might be nice to go, especially this time of year, because the all-night sun is sort of the midsummer night or something they called in Sweden that time. It's about sort of a gay relationship too, a lesbian relationship, about a teacher in the U.S. who is very much attracted. She's in her upper 20s, so she's youthful, and she has an 18-year-old student in her first year of college, and the two of them become very good friends and then some. And the 18-year-old Swedish girl invites the 28-year-old to spend the summer in Sweden, and then all kinds of things happen there. So you get a good sense of Swedish society, which I didn't know much about before. And it's called The All-Night Sun. I think that might be in the fall. It comes out September, October, maybe late August. I'm not sure.
That one's also
yeah, The All-Night Sun. There, Diane. I see you've got it up there. Yes. So that is again something I would recommend.
And Mike's recommendation of the Natasha Trethewey book reminded me of a book that just came out on Tuesday that I have only read bits and pieces of, but it is another poetry collection by an amazing African-American woman poet named Rachel Eliza Griffiths, and the book is called Seeing the Body. And it is a combination of her photography and her poetry. They didn't print a galley of it, but she is a Yaddo artist. She has and actually created a lot of this book during a residency at Yaddo here in Saratoga. And she was supposed to be one of the panelists at what would have been the first annual Saratoga Book Festival this past weekend. I was super excited to be bringing her to town. I had read multiple poems from this collection and was just blown away by her work and her writing, and was really looking forward to introducing her to our community as a Yaddo artist, really worth watching. And her collection just came out. And as I said, I've only read, a handful of the poems from it when I was working on the programming for the book festival, but it was the book that I was really excited about. So that is a brand new book that I think the link in the chat. We don't have it in stock yet. Shipping has been weird, as you can imagine. So not every new release is arriving right on time, and I guess hers has not yet. But, so another great collection of poems.
I'll pop in my 2 cents also and say that though I have not read Memorial Drive, Natasha Trethewey's poetry is really something. Monument, I believe her new and selected came out. I wrote a staff review of it. I believe it won the Pulitzer, or maybe it was the Pulitzer for Native Ground, an earlier volume of hers. But she's got some really amazing poetry about race, about her own family. But there are some wonderful ekphrastic poems that are sort of written about paintings. And there was a whole tradition of, I can't remember the name of the saint right now, but who had a gangrenous leg and then it miraculously became healed, but it was from another, like a black leg from a different race. And so there's a number of paintings about that theme, and she writes poetry about it, and it's really, really powerful. That's the one I remember the most distinctly. And there's also some other great poems about race that are fairly recent too, and that book Monument, and I'll put the link for that one up too.
So we are just about out of time. It has been great seeing you all and talking this evening. We did record this, as I mentioned, so it will eventually be up on our YouTube channel. So you can subscribe on YouTube to see that if you want to see a repeat. And if you missed any recommendations, we will be putting up a blog post at northshire.com tomorrow with links to all of these books that we talked about. So that is the plan going forward. Our next Northshire Live with an author is happening tomorrow night. It's a busy week in digital Northshire land. That is Rebecca.
Tomorrow night it is an author that would have been a Booktopia author, Rebecca Dinerstein Knight, presenting her book Hex. And she will be in conversation with her friend who's got another recent book, Marie-Hélène Bertino, presenting her book Parakeet. That's tomorrow at 5.
So we will see you all then, or perhaps next week. Next Tuesday is Bloomsday, the day that James Joyce's Ulysses is set. So we'll be having a little community read aloud on Tuesday at 5. Mike will be back as one of our readers. We'll all have our copies of Ulysses. We'll read passages we love. Anyone who wants to come and bring their own copy of Ulysses and read passages they love is more than welcome. So we'll see you next week for that also. And then lots of great Northshire Live events carrying on as long as we're not able to do events in the store. So we'll keep doing them here and keep seeing you all here. And thanks so much everyone for being here tonight.